Hi, I'm Arthur, and it's occurred to me I haven't talked about the Harlequins before, or at least not much. They're a bit of an odd faction, I will admit. The clowns, the jokey jokesters, the first of the fools. These dudes are also probably the top end of painting skill necessary in order for you to make them look the standard that's in their little codex. They are an odd faction that has somewhat of a non-existent history in the lore, and I feel the compulsion to talk about the clowns. But there is going to be a bit of a twist here, boys. Something I think the clowns would likely appreciate, especially in regards to my tone on this subject, as I myself am quite the clown in real life. So, let's break down the Harlequins, who they are, and touch on why I think GW hates them, because they kind of do. I'm gonna do a bit of a brief overview with them, so let's start with the lore. Who are the Harlequins? The basics about them is very simple and yet weirdly complicated at the same time. One might even call it so confusing that while looking up things as simple as the markings that they use to designate their rank and faction, you would get so confused as to potentially die of a massive stroke, which I did. But they are probably one of the most special Eldar, as during the birth of Slaanesh, we all know this, I think, but about 99% of the Eldar pantheon was consumed by Slaanesh in their weird frenzy. But there was one god that survived, that being Kagarak, the first fool, the god of spicy memes and replacing people's toilet paper with the gimpy leaf. Kagarak ended up saving a bunch of the weirder parts of Eldar society at the time, the outcasts. Kagarak is the god of fools, you see, merriment and entertainment. They were just strong enough to be able to save a bunch of Eldar and took them into a specific spot in the webway, specifically into his domain of the Black Library. This god is strong enough, by the way, to manually pluck the souls of Eldar out of the jaws of Slaanesh most times. I'm being hyperbolic, but yeah, he could basically save some of his dudes every now and then and bring the soul stones of these individuals back to the library. The culture of the Harlequins has basically evolved around the idea of performance. Since Kagarak is the first fool after all, they kind of do a weird alternate reality version of the Codex Astartes, where instead of a field manual that tells you how to deal with most encounters, the Harlequins, when they're on a battlefield, will basically take a look at the situation, and one of them will audibly exclaim, "You know, this reminds me of that one sonnet about the demon who shit theyselves." And thus the Harlequins, who do nothing but memorize plays performances, will likely have a swift chuckle, and then they begin to organize themselves as actors in that play, reenacting it with the enemy forces, with each actor taking on a different role in that play. Some are lesser roles, some are more well-known. There are some Harlequins that have the unfortunate duty of acting out Slaanesh during these plays, which is unfortunate, which is a good segue to talk about these, since these individuals are basically cursed, as they are essentially making fun of the Eldar's greatest fear and the thing that is constantly eyeing them, Slaanesh. And I would assume Slaanesh would take a great deal of personal amusement of ripping them into tiny pieces once they get a hold of their soul. It is stated that even though Kagarak can a lot of the times save the spirits and the minds of the Harlequins, this individual, the Solitaire, it's not exactly a safe bet. It's kind of implied that sometimes Slaanesh does get a Solitaire. I question the validity of a few things about the Solitaires, but apparently they are so strong that it is actually still very rare for them to die. They are very, very powerful. They are allegedly on par with Primarchs, and I question the validity of that, but the culture of the Harlequins is very often chaotic, as you could assume, with them openly mocking their greatest adversary to their face. Their key philosophy, being divided into as many tasks as humanly possible, allows them to essentially be as confusing as possible, so it's hard for people to figure out what their next move is. Their sub-factions are the Masks. They are basically a bunch of groups of like-minded clowns that decided what style of cream they liked in their throwing pies. Ranging from whipped cream to mayonnaise, all the way up to skin-absorbent LSD paste, the most confusing part about the Masks is just how different each of them are. Their goals are damn near all over the place, but they do have a consistent goal with each, and that is to somehow further the agendas of Kagarak to some degree, but he's also very confusing, so, there's that. This is actually by design, I will state, as a lot of their culture is dictated by them to try and be as hard as possible to be understood, so that they're basically mysterious at all times. Unit markings are in random places and sometimes seemingly have no meaning. Symbols to denote battle groups are placed in ununiform locations in groups' bodies. There is a ranking system, but only they can kind of understand it. They have psychers that can see the future and are used by other members of the Eldari culture out there, you know, Drukari, Craftworlders, so on and so forth, to figure out shit that goes on in the future, which is honestly kind of cool. I know the culture of the Harlequins is kind of the main focus on what I'm talking about right now, but you kind of have to understand that these guys are very weird. They are incredibly different from Craftworld Eldar, the same level of difference as the Drukari, or something like the Exodites. They are a fan-favorite faction with a long pedigree of being a bit of a niche pick for Space Elf fans, but a well-loved one at that. They have unique war gear not found in the rest of the Eldar line. They have unique vehicles that move at speeds most Eldar would think is just a bit too fast. So with all that in mind, my next question to you is, when you have a fan-favorite faction that gets people genuinely into the game because of their unique features, they have such a unique look and way of playing, why is it that when given the option to expand this roster, appease fans, and make them happy that you didn't forget that their favorite niche faction exists, or you just combine the faction into regular Eldar because I guess they are similar enough, and the Ynnari were a meta pick in the 8th edition. Why on God's green earth would GW choose the latter? There's a lot of shit to complain about when it comes to the Eldar, but if I may be frank, I think the Harlequins being moved into the Eldar Codex is just a little bit impolite. It kind of erases their unique lineage and just kind of makes them a bit of a background unit. I know they have a unique subgroup, whatever it's called in the Codex, but it doesn't really matter. I don't know. Maybe, if I may be honest, I'm a little annoyed at GW constantly. Okay, I'm just fucking with you. It's not one of those videos. I promise I'll never turn into one of those YouTube channels, and I feel like I've used the Arthur Complains token for this year on something else. I'd have to double check. So I felt like making a bit more of a level-headed video discussing a topic that I feel nobody really discusses that much. Well, as level-headed as someone so bellicose as myself can produce. So, to answer the question of why GW hates Harlequins, they don't. They hate Beastmen. But that's besides the point. But if you were a Harlequins fan, it would be pretty easy for you to feel that way. See, GW has been making a lot of decisions lately that have had me perplexed and confused and like downright upset at a few of them, I guess. So I decided to ask around and get some opinions from other content creators who will remain nameless, obviously. And I just wanted to take this time to dig into GW's recent issues. Some things that I disagree with and try to explain them as well as get your opinions on them. This is going to be a bit more of a discussion because there's a few things that I think you guys who probably play the game have noticed, but I kind of want to have this as a back and forth. And if you want to have a bit more of a direct back and forth, there is a Discord server. I don't bring it up as much as I used to, but yeah, there's a public Discord server. It's linked in every single one of my videos. You should go there. I'm not as active as you'd think. I'm more of an absentee mascot character, like a Freddy Fazbear hiding in the background, like an Easter egg, you know? I'm just a talking head, and that's better than nothing most times. But what trends are we going to discuss, and how do I feel about them? Well, over the last few years, there has been what I can best describe as GW trying to do a brand consolidation of some sort. Maybe I'm using that term incorrectly, but there are a lot of factions that seem to be getting lumped into either larger groups or making them less accessible in other games. We'll kind of get into it, and I've touched on it a little bit in the past, but I've been reading a lot of Games Workshop's history, and this has kind of got me thinking about the precedents and how this is new, but there is some interesting nuance to it. A lot of this coincides with GW reaching into a playbook labeled How to Try and Capitalize on Space Marine 2 being great and bringing more people into the hobby than there ever likely was before. Not exactly a catchy name, but we'll roll with it. I'm not exactly one to be very brief, so yeah, I kind of want to talk about a few examples, but the Harlequins are the best sacrificial goat I could throw up to bring you guys in here to kind of get your ideas and eyes on something. You know, we're about 10 minutes deep right now. Sunken cost fallacy has to have applied at this point. So yeah, let's get into a discussion here. There are a few things I've been a bit concerned with, and I felt it was appropriate to discuss them here. So let's dive face first into this. The big ones for 40k, the ones that are likely on your minds, are the folding of Deathwatch into the Imperial Agents, the combining of most of the elements of the Yunari and the Harlequins into the Craft Worlds, Eldar books, and, that kind of stuff. To a lesser extent, the viability of running demons separately and the extreme encouragement to run them as a mixed batch of demons, as well as keeping demons out of the Godsworn legions, like the World Eaters, Death Guard, etc., aside from like one detachment per book. These changes in 10th edition have had an interesting flavor to them, as they do reek a bit of Corporation trying to consolidate the bloated faction amounts they have had kind of kicking around throughout the eras of Blood Mayhem and at least 3 revivals of Lucius. This also stretches back to probably one of the most controversial things that GW has done in a very long time, and that is the removal of dozens upon dozens of classic Firstborn and classic units of Space Marines from the game. They are just no longer available for purchase. They'll likely come back as like a legacy unit that you can purchase, but this may not seem like the same thing, but there is a lot of similarities you might not notice at first. But the theory behind them is pretty much the same, and I think I'm gonna call it the Grand GW consolidation, because this stretches all the way into the other games as well. See, the aggressively smart individual you are, you must be thinking to yourself, wow, why would they do this? And I don't pretend to know, but after eyeing some patterns in other games, I'd noticed something. But if you want the shorthand answer, the answer is money. They want money. But let's break this down a bit, because I play a lot of GW games. I play a lot of war games in general. So you play AOS and Old World. What is the one thing both games should have in common, but they don't because of something I would presume is a faceless corporation's equivalent to spite? That's right. The Skaven are only playable in one of these 2 games, AOS, which is insane to think about considering the Skaven are one of the most fan-favored factions in Old World, but they were moved over to AOS only. Instead of having Skaven be available for both games, where you could just change the bases out in between games, they are in one, and it actually goes a bit further than that, because you see, Skaven got some model refreshes. Okay, I'm gonna say this is a conspiracy theory, and there's absolutely no weight to back this up, but this is just me being me. But the range refresh that they got for a lot of their models, the clan rats specifically are a good example, have incredibly wide, randomly splayed out poses that would make them incredibly hard to stick on 25mm and rank them up into a big brick for Old World. So that makes them almost not impossible, but incredibly difficult for you to transfer them between both games, and I think that might actually be intentional. But you could also just get a 3D printer to print your rats, because hey, they have Legends rules. You can still play the Skaven, have fun with an incredibly breakable army of resin rats, or your army of stacked up filament rats that look as if they're perpetually in 480i graphics. Nothing against 480i retro nerds, especially for those old scubs, but I'm getting off topic. They make it so that you can't play many of these factions cross games. It's why they're getting rid of the ability to play mono demon factions, because that means you could just play Slaanesh and AOS 40k, potentially Old World, and I guess potentially Horus Heresy, but their demon rules have always been kind of weird. Same with something like the Firstborn Space Marines. Sure, you could run a squad of Mark 6 Tactical Marines from the Horus Heresy as intercessors in 40k, but GW would probably rather stone you to death than let you play at an official tournament with something that isn't WYZZYWIG. Removal of the ability to play things in certain games like that is pretty rough, I will state, especially for those who can't afford to play in multiple games. As someone who lives on a rather poor island, most people only play 40k here because they can't afford to play other games, which makes it so that I'm the only person who plays most of these games. But regardless, for a lot of GW's products, you can get into them pretty easily. So something like Necromunda. I love Necromunda. All you need to get is 2 boxes of minis, depending on what gang you play, the rulebooks, or the magazine that the rules come from. Necromunda's very weird with the rules, but get a bunch of shoe boxes, carve them out, and pretend they're terrain, and then you have a good game. But with other games, like, say, Horus Heresy, you're expected to make a 3,000 1,000 point army on average for your standard game. I find not asking people to play with your models across different games using the same ones is a bit unreasonable. Well, aside from you, Custodes, stay winning. Truly throughout the heavens and earth, you alone are the honored one. And yes, that was a fucking JJK reference. I've been reading multiple of my Japanese comic books recently. Side note, go read Gachiakata. It's really good. But regardless, the Custodes do have almost perfect crossover between 40k and the Horus Heresy, and it makes it so that people actually are able to enjoy both games. Genuinely had a person who tried to play Custodes in 40k, hate how they play in 40k, play one game with me in the Horus Heresy, and get genuinely excited at how powerful they were. And if you're listening to this video, you know who you are. It's such an interesting idea, though I will state that the Custodes are not immune, as they can't use Allura's Terminators because those are a 40k thing, and the jet bikes are also different. But if ever someone complains that their opponent has brought Dawn Eagle jet bikes to a Horus Heresy game instead of the Agamatus jet bike in my earshot, when one Horus Heresy Gyro Falcon jet bike costs more dollar-wise than an entire unit of Dawn Eagles for 40k, I will politely ask them to follow me to the nearest alleyway while I turn my body cam off so as not to record the polite conversation we are about to have. Tangent aside, there's a lot of factions that are being swept aside. Hell, the Skitarii can be played in Horus Heresy and 40k, but you can only run the standard Skitarii with knights in Horus Heresy, which is kind of awesome, and it's either a genius to get people to purchase knights or even resin knights, or horrible corporate cynicism. Either way, I think it's cool. It's probably both now that I think about it further, but the further along in the timeline we get, I've noticed things develop less cross-game support. In fact, GW seems to be quite hostile about you transporting things in between each game. Also, things tend to get put into smaller boxes. Small factions tend to get absorbed into larger factions, and it makes it easier for you to play everything all at once and have access to everything all at once. So, like, demons get put into the same category as each other, and you are rewarded for playing all of them instead of just playing one faction. Same with a lot of the homogenous feel that a lot of the different factions have been feeling in 10th edition, like Space Marines. Most Space Marines have access to pretty much the same shit across the board, which sucks because I like playing things that are very, very different. Now, I know that Tactical Marines weren't too different back in the day, but intercessors are intercessors are intercessors. They all look the same, and the upgrade kits don't really change too much, and there isn't really much of a veteran intercessor kit out there, so, you know, Dark Angel fans can't have their Roby boys anymore, but only just recently did we start to get, like, whole-on new units outside of the Black Templars, and that was with the Grey Hunters. The Grey Hunters are a unit that was added to the Space Wolves relaunch that kind of happened to kind of give them a bit more of a unique flavor, but Grey Hunters and Bloodclaws are also kind of their own unique thing. Before that, we just had Black Templars, and they just had the Primaris Crusader squads. Also, I guess you could count the Blood Angels, but Death Company, it doesn't really count as a troop choice, and the upgrade sprue doesn't really make the intercessors that stand out-ish. Everything is nice and homogenous, while GW kind of tries to silence criticisms about them not supporting factions by kind of just ignoring ones they release in favor of the bestsellers. I'm just saying the Leagues of Votan, outside of their initial release, have had, count 'em with me now, 2 limited edition miniature characters, one of which is not an illegal configuration, and 2 kill teams, one of which is just a slightly modified version of the normal troop choice that they get. Though while I'm talking about the Leagues of Votan, let me just say that if the last faction to be released codex-wise for the entirety of 10th edition before 11th edition is announced is going to be Leagues of Votan again, I swear on everything I hold fucking sacred, that would be the crash out heard round the world from me. I know I mentioned at 50k I'd get a Leagues of Votan tattoo, and I did. Right on my arm. I stand by it. They are still my favorite faction in the game. Here's the tattoo. I know I'm late, very late, not a little late. I'm very, very late, but I love the Short Kings. But don't worry, GW seems to be wanting to focus on easier ways to sell miniatures more and more, focusing on the short-term gain rather than the long-term relationships with fans. So they're probably going to send out a lot of Leagues of Votan miniatures for the second wave of releases, or they're just going to do a single infantry character for a unit that we barely use, but that's it. That's fine. Though I do have a caveat that might change your perspective a little bit, but we'll get into that later. later. I gotta bait the hook a little bit here. Okay, so, this just in, breaking news, literally writing the script as this is coming out, but, yeah, so the Horus Heresy leaks are out for the new edition, and, this isn't looking good, every pony. I don't feel so good looking at some of these leaks, and I'm kind of hoping everything I'm seeing is a bit of a lie, at least the bad stuff, but goddamn does it seem legit. Okay, so let's break this down, as this is almost a perfect encapsulation of everything I wanted to talk about. But yeah, let's do a radical left turn for the rest of this video and talk about this shit so you can be up to date, and then we can bring it back to the main issue at hand. This does tie into my main point, but oh man, I feel really bad about the Harlequins fans that are probably mauling right now, as they thought this was going to be the lore video about the clowns. Sorry to you all, especially you, Chrono. I will cover them all someday, I promise. Okay, let's break down these leaks a bit, and then conclude this confusing video, and hopefully I don't get too mad.
2 hours later.
Oh, wow. So that is, okay. So after consuming a few videos about the new Horus Heresy stuff, as well as reading all the leaks that got sent out, this is genuinely the most GW move I've seen in a while. And by GW move, I mean they are trying to ruin something that we all loved. To the point where, well, honestly, if I may be a little bit especially spiteful for a moment, I just gotta say, you just had to do it, didn't you? You just couldn't help yourself. You couldn't leave well enough alone, huh? I was gonna try and have a bit of a level head during this, but okay, I guess I'm gonna have to pull another Arthur Complains token out of my fetid asshole really quickly to genuinely ask you, what the f was the plan here? As if I didn't already know. But what am I talking about here? Well, for one, GW did something dumb. I know, surprise, it's never happened before. The rules of Horus Heresy 3rd edition, they're fine. They seem pretty good. I like them. I like the combat mechanics for dueling, but I feel like it would take up too much time when actually playing, but whatever. They actually addressed a lot of the concerns I had about playing the system for quite some time, because for the last couple years, Horus Heresy was kind of my main system. I'd play a weekly game with a good friend of mine, and we would escalate every week, you know, 250 points extra every week. It was really fun, so I got to really know the system. Yeah, they didn't make it a side grade to 10th edition, which was cool, which is the main thing I was worried about, that they were going to simplify things. So they just ended up making a few more things better and made it hell of a lot more Byzantine in some areas, but that's neither here nor there. It gets a B+, maybe an A-. I'll play it and figure it out there. But okay, so my problem herein lies in the same shit I've been talking about, and I would love to hear their justification for this, but a lot of the problems I'm seeing is that, well, they've made it so that some of the most common configurations to some of the most commonly used units are not able to be used. I'm not parsing through them all, but a lot of the units can no longer use, say, combi weapons. Tartaros Terminators can no longer use power fists or chain fists, which is fucking insane. And apparently there is no mention of a chaplain in the books that have been leaked, which is kind of odd considering that is a very recognized staple of the 40k universe. For those who don't know why this is bad, let's zoom into the Tartaros kits really quickly. Pretty much every Terminator kit in the Horus Heresy and in the history of 40k has made it so that the standard weapon that a Terminator can come with is a combi bolt gun or a storm bolter and a power fist, but you could also add a little thingy underneath to make it a chain fist. The Tartaros kits were no exception, with one option to make a power sword for likely the sergeant in order to initiate challenges. Now the Tartaros Terminators cannot run power fists or chain fists, which means that the kit that we've been using for, you know, a little under a decade, a little over a decade, I don't know when this game was fully released, well, they're not usable anymore, at least if you want them to look like how the rules are statted, which for most people who don't want to buy Forge World resin to upgrade the kits to have power weapons, or people who don't have access to a 3D printer which can give them new arms, that basically means almost everybody who bought the Tartaros Terminator kits. This decision seems to be across the board in terms of its usage, and why is that? Well, if the previews on Warhammer Community for the Horus Heresy are real, that means that they are likely going to be releasing new Terminator kits for both Cataphracti and I would assume also Tartaros kits, following the whole idea of no no models, no rules. So if you don't have the ability to create the model by something that you can buy from the GW store, then they're not going to allow you to use it in the game. And for the Horus Heresy, they're finally reaching that edge of the abyss where they can just start pumping out plastic kits over and over again. So they want to make new Terminator kits to fit the larger scale of the Marines in the game, and also are likely going to re-release the Tartaros kits with nothing but power weapons. So you now have to buy the new Terminators in GW's eyes, which is complete bullshit, if I may be so bold to say. Though I will say, I hope these leaks are not real. Take them with a grain of salt, though they seem real enough. But again, it just seems weirdly cruel to people who have been playing the game for a long time, as to be honest, these rules do not impact anyone who literally just gets into the game at Saturnine. Like, if you are just getting into the game now and you want to pick up some of the new Terminators, you're not going to feel the sting of not having power fists because you bought Tartaros Terminators years ago. It just doesn't make sense. And if you're playing only casual matches, I mean, I wouldn't get mad at you if you ran them as whatever, you know, power lances. That would have been cool, right? But no, this only hurts people who've been playing for quite some time and now can't run their models as they are modeled. And that's really frustrating. This kind of leads me into my biggest point of all. So walk with me, talk with me. I promise it won't hurt much. Let's engage in a weird line of thinking, put aside our pissed off mindsets, our rage, ask ourselves a simple question. This question is one that invades my goddamn dreams and will likely never leave my mind until the day I die for various reasons, and that is simply, why? Why would they do this so consistently, especially recently, seemingly making it more difficult for older players to enjoy the game while prioritizing new players getting into the hobby? Well, to play devil's advocate and not just say corporate greed, the answer is incredibly complicated. I should note this is mostly just speculation. I'm an idiot. I am not a marketing guy. I am a university dropout who has really no marketable skill other than being kind of funny sometimes and able to monitor trends. But it doesn't take much brain power to really connect the dots here, at least in my opinion. One of the biggest appeals of 40k when I first got into the hobby was a Space Marine is a Space Marine is a Space Marine. A tactical Marine you bought back in 3rd edition was still usable today as long as you had it on the right base, that's easy to fix. So when you could realistically keep playing the same Marines for years to come without changing anything except buying maybe the $30 to $50 new rulebook, you could kind of see a trend here. It's not like a card game where with each set there is a bunch of new cards you can pick up to make your deck better. Hiring an artist to draw art for a card and then printing that card 1,000 times, placing it randomly throughout a set, it is not the same as hiring a sculptor, creating a box of miniatures, and distributing those over and over again. There's no random element. There's no constantly buying a box of miniatures. If you get 3 of something, generally speaking, that's all you'll ever really need. There is much more resources at play in its production, so it's not feasible to constantly pump out new miniatures as well. I'm not saying one style of art is better than the other, obviously. If you know me, I adore artists for Magic the Gathering like Mike Francina and Stephen Belladin for their work, especially with the Phyrexians, but GW can't just keep releasing sets of hundreds of new miniatures every 6 months like, say, a card game would, due to there being no ban lists and also just due to them having to keep track of rules, stat pages, army compositions, and how they would interact with each other. It was kind of a problem back in the original days of 1st and 2nd edition, where you would have to keep track of the rules of each individual miniature and everything was so hyper unique. It is hard to do so. So back in the day, once you had your army, you didn't really need to do much else. The base sizes may change. You could always just rebase them. I refer you to what happened to Old World, where there was a point where Space Marines, not 40k as a whole, just Space Marines as a whole were outselling the entirety of Warhammer Fantasy as a line. Does that mean that Warhammer Fantasy was unpopular? No. Everyone just had their armies and no one really had a desire to build more. At least from my canvassing of people who played Fantasy and were particularly pissed off when it got shut down. I could be wrong. I'm just extrapolating on the data that I'm working with, and if I am wrong, brick on me, brick to my head. I don't know, man. I didn't play Fantasy until the game was dead and buried, so I may be a bit biased from hearing the stories of people who were pissed about AOS being a thing. After doing my research into the history of TSR and the rise of D&D, I found out that a lot of how TSR made its money pre-D&D and also during the early rise of D&D was through the sales of physical merchandise like dice and the sale of rules. With war games, we have something similar, especially for the majority of boxed war games that were being brought up around the time of like the 60s, 70s, 80s, and 90s. You would sell someone a set of rules, never sell them really miniatures, but you would sell them tokens in order to represent that. And if you sold a product that was really good, you could sell an additional booklet of rules alongside that. That was kind of how D&D was originally created. It started off as Chainmail, which was a pseudo war game where you could technically sort of level up a guy, but your guy's manpower was measured in how many men he was as strong as. And then eventually some guy named Dave Arneson was able to create the idea of dungeon delving with a small group of people that you would control, and that ended up kind of mixing together to become D&D. But these were elements that were sold independently, and new rulebooks were constantly being pumped out in order to do that. Now, that is a way for companies in wargaming to make money, because selling rules is just as viable as selling miniatures. But after people complained so much in 8th edition about how we had to buy like 4 books of rules to play our armies, we may have scared GW away from it forever, but now GW has a conundrum where if they don't put out new miniatures and give you a reason to buy them, how can they have money? You're just going to sit on the armies that you have and just buy the $50 book every edition every like 6 years and then just go from there. I guess you could say through the Black Library and through the ancillary media like the video game properties and so on, but the books of the Black Library have always been a bit of a preview and a way to promote the toys, you know, the miniatures that they're based off of, and the games are just fun and they're always a crapshoot. Sometimes they succeed, sometimes they fail. A lot of them have been succeeding recently, but that doesn't cover the fact that no one remembers the majority of the old shitty ones. And even still, these are all to promote the game itself. Why do you think when Space Marine 2 came out, there was a Titus miniature that was created, even though he's just a Primaris Lieutenant? It's basically like how old Saturday morning cartoons used to promote their toys in the 80s. Before that, I think became pretty illegal, which is why, if I may continue to play Devil's Advocate, I get it. I think it makes sense because getting someone new into the hobby means more sales of your current product. Instead of promoting to other people whom already have their armies and are just going to buy the next single purchase you put out, having someone new buy a whole army is going to bring more revenue in and keep the company on its expansive, I don't know, path. It allows them to continue to create profit. As we all should know, a company's first goal should always be profit first to sustain itself, and then satisfying customers once it's able to keep itself afloat. Ahem. But is that right? Should we accept that most of what we enjoy is going to be put in boxes that make it harder to use for the sake of corporate greed? Our Skaven army in fantasy is no longer truly supported, so you might as well pick up a different army that is going to be getting you new miniatures and actually getting support in the future. Oh, and you wanted to play Beastmen in AOS? Well, they aren't even in Legends, so you might as well play a different army or move over to Old World. Make sure to pick up a fuckload of new bases, and most of them are in the GW store, so I mean, they changed the scale of the bases too, so moving most things up by 5mm, so you can't even use the old miniatures you used to have for Warhammer Fantasy. You have to use the new miniatures, or at least the new bases. Just buy the new stuff, just buy the new product, consume the new product. It's the best way to ensure you're going to always have support, except, well, what if I don't want to? What if I do want to play demons in every game? What if I think that style of army building is more fun, and having the ability to play with my friends in every game if I can't afford to play every game is pretty cool? I speak from the perspective of someone who grew up really poor. Hell, I was considered when I moved out on my own to be so below the poverty line that it's kind of nerve-wracking for quite some time, up until I was like 25, making less than $20,000 a year from any odd job that I could put together. And by the way, that's in Canadian, so that's probably close to like $15K a year in American. But I'd work, pay my rent, buy my shit to eat, and every 6 months I'd be able to afford maybe 1 box of miniatures, and that was a big deal for me. That was something that I always looked forward to. I'm doing a lot better now, thanks to YouTube and all of you individuals, but I never forgot the perspective it gave me. This is already a bit of a higher end hobby, so to have to rescale your army when things change on a whim is frustrating. I'm not saying I know better or I know how to make money, but when you combine the Harlequins into the Eldari Codex in an attempt to have more people play them, because now it's basically just a big billboard for people who already play Craftworld Eldar to tell them, hey, I mean, the rules are right there, you might as well just pick some up, give them a shot, there's not many of them. It just feels a bit predatory. It's this grand consolidation that is to try to push things in an inorganic way. I think that there is a lot of criticism here, but I also think I'm too stupid to figure out a different answer. Personally, I'm fine with getting a load of new rulebooks if it means I don't have to worry about someday Space Marine primary weapons not being bolt guns. It's unfortunate. So to go back to my original question once more and wrap this up, does GW hate the Harlequins? No. GW is trying to sell more miniatures, and it's easier to promote them in the Craftworld Codex than it is to add more miniatures to that line that really probably wasn't selling well. So a lot of their choices revolve around that. It's making it so that you are kind of put into a box where you have to buy the new miniature, because if you don't, well, they're not going to make a profit and you won't be able to play the game. It's punishing people for trying to stick to their choices. But I'm going to end this video with a disclaimer. I'm an idiot, a fraud, and not a marketing guy. I'm just paying attention to trends and trying to make sense of them, and it makes me progressively more and more depressed as I go. Will I be proven wrong in my assumptions here? Yeah, probably. I'm not that smart, as I keep saying. But what do you all think? Do you think I'm off base? Do you think it's all just a ploy to make more money since, well, mini wargaming as a whole is hard to have a sustained profit? Let me know. Speaking of sustained profit, thank you to my channel members for supporting me. With your help, I can put out these think pieces and not worry about dying or shriveling up. If you want to support the channel, me, my editors, and make sure that they don't starve, then become a channel member today. You get access to bonus videos a month, and you are happy knowing that I can continue doing this, I guess. Thanks again for watching, and yeah, I should note, I do think that GW may not hate the Harlequins, but they do hate the Beastmen. They are consistently the worst and most shitted upon faction in any game, lore-wise and rule-wise. As a Fantasy Beastmen player from 7th and 8th edition back when I got into Warhammer Fantasy, big sad.